You all laugh at this. So this guy is stranded on this desert island for years. They're laughing because I just told this, but I didn't have the button because the 13-year-old in the booth messed it up. And he's finally rescued, and the captain comes ashore, and he sees, he's got these 3 buildings there. He says, well, what are those? He says, well, that's where I live. That's my house. It's a lovely house. He says, yeah, but what's that other building? He says, well, that's where I go to church. I worship every Sunday. My faith is very important to me. And the captain says, well, what's the 3rd building? He says, well, that's where I used to go to church. Division and disunity have become so common in the church that it's become fodder for jokes. And it would be funny, except it's so painful. And it's so disastrous. You've likely experienced that. I certainly have. There's nothing unusual about this story. Churches have split up over the color of the carpet, whether or not the new building should have chairs or pews. Music, of course, has been a fighting issue for a long time. People leave churches because the Bible study group didn't meet at their house or they didn't get the lead in the Christmas cantata. Some churches have split over whether you should take communion with 1 cup or many cups, whether you should even have music at all. This year we split because people are wearing masks or they're not wearing masks. A friend of mine in my weekly pastors group, Massachusetts, now comes around and they're checking churches to make sure that they're segregating. If you're not wearing a mask, they want you in a completely separate section of the building. With the social media, you can get online and spread rumors or lies about your pastor or other people in the church or the leaders. Bottom line is, most of the time, I think church is split because someone didn't get their own way. Another buddy of mine in my Connect group on Wednesday mornings in Arizona has a woman who's very upset with the church leadership right now because the drummer plays barefoot. And collectively, 25 of us rolled our eyes and said, are you serious? Would you tell this woman to get a life? He says, yeah, you can't even see him because he sits way back behind the piano and he walks on and off the stage. At some point, she noticed that he wasn't wearing shoes, and now she's offended. And she's on a crusade to make sure that all the musicians are shod. I learned just this week of a preacher on the East Coast. As he was preaching, people in the congregation were standing up and challenging him and saying mean, nasty, ugly things. And he said, that's it. I don't have to put up with this anymore. I quit. Now imagine you've been working with a coworker or a family member who's far from God, but they finally decided to give it a try. What do you think they experienced when they saw that? Years ago at my church in Maryland, I got up to preach. The church had been having issues, and when I got to this point, I noticed that more than half of my congregation had gotten up, put on their coats because it was my birthday, January the 5th, walked out the door. Never saw them again. Very attractive to the people outside the church. To the family members of all those people who don't do anything with church, but they hear these stories, and then we wonder why they show no interest in coming to church. If you've ever been through a church split, if you've ever felt you had to leave a church to protect yourself or to heal your own wounds, or if you've ever ached because your dearest friends left a church, yeah, that's hard. Then you know the deep soul-wrenching pain that this can cause. It's the pain of a divorce. It's the brokenness of a family divided. Many of us here know the pain of divorce in our own families. There's nothing like it. This is not what Jesus wanted for his church. This is not what God ever intended for his people. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, Tim read Psalm 133, how good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. That's Old Testament. Even in the Old Testament, actually constantly, God had trouble with keeping his people together. It's a constant issue. The book of Numbers, you may not be aware of this, has 7 stories of disunity, mostly centered around people grumbling because they didn't agree with where their leaders were taking them. I'm going to do a series one of these days from the book of Numbers, but this royally ticked God off, and the ground swallowed some of them, and judgment fire consumed others, and another time he had to send snakes among the congregation. God takes unity very seriously. In John chapter 17, what's called the high priestly prayer of Jesus, it's the longest recorded prayer. He prays for 3 different things. In the first 5 verses, he prays for himself to be glorified for completing the work that the Father had sent him to do. Beginning at verse 6, he prays for his apostles, the ones that he had personally selected. He prays that they would be protected from the evil one. He prays that they would be kept united, which almost didn't happen, by the way. And he prays that they would be sanctified by truth. Whatever that means, that's a whole nother message. And then he comes to verse 20 and 21, which is for us today. He prays for us. He says, my prayer is not for them alone. It's not for my apostles. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. That's you and me. We believe because of the message of the apostles. So he's praying for us. That all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, and may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Jesus prays that there's a unity among the church. Those who would believe and respond to the gospel message that the apostles proclaimed. And that this unity would reflect the nature of God himself. And the result would be that the world would believe that God has sent Jesus. And yet today, 2,000 years later, there are well over 200 different denominations and subgroups of those denominations. Many of us have come from different denominations. You know, I come from the Episcopal Church. Some of you come from Lutheran backgrounds, some maybe Methodist, some from others. Maybe Catholic, maybe no background. Our own brotherhood of churches called the Restoration Movement, which may not even be familiar to some of you, but that's our history. This began as a unity movement on the American frontier because so many churches brought the divisions from Europe into the New World, and then they started fighting and splitting over those divisions that had nothing to do with them at all. It was, in some cases, hundreds of years old fights. And so they said, well, let's just go back to the Bible. Let's just go back to the New Testament. Let's just call Bible things by Bible names and do Bible things in Bible ways. And they began unifying Baptists and Pentecostals and Presbyterians and It was a really cool movement back in the late 1700s, the early to the mid 1800s. And yet our unity movement has split several times as well. It's like the guy on the island. We can't help it. It's in our DNA. Which is tragic because the unity of the church provides credibility to the world that Jesus is from God. What we believe and what we teach and what we preach is important, and I'm going to touch on that at the very end. I got a caveat I've got to throw in. But what we teach, preach, and believe is very, very important. But it's just as important, vitally important, how we do life together as a body. And quite often unbelievers are justified in their unbelief when they look at a fighting church and they say, no thank you, I've got enough drama in my life, I don't need it at my church. And there are people that will not darken the doors of a church. And maybe all it would take would be for some of us to go to them and say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. That's not what God intended. And boy, wouldn't it be helpful if a lot more believers said that to one another. I'm so sorry. But we don't. We power up and we get into defense mode and we pull out the missile launchers and we go at it convinced that we're right. And we may be. But at what a cost? I think you'd agree with me that this prayer of Jesus in John 17 appears to be woefully unanswered. The early church was rife with division. Almost every New Testament letter appealed to the believers to knock it off and learn how to get along with each other. It's actually almost humorous. Read your New Testament epistles. They were written because churches weren't doing this. And the apostles are pulling their hair out, and they know what Jesus prayed, and they're trying to get their people. Would you reflect the nature of God? You've got the nature of Jesus living within you. You've got the Holy Spirit living within you. Look like it. Clearly, unity is hard work. Here's some samples just from the New Testament, just a couple. 1 Corinthians 1:10, Paul writes, I appeal to you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus, that all of you agree with one another so there might be no divisions among you, and you might be perfectly united in mind and thought. That's a tall order, isn't it? Perfectly united? We can't even agree if an oboe is the most important instrument in the orchestra there. We're gonna have words. Jim Osborne did a communion meditation on this whole subject of unity and said that the oboe is the most important because it tunes to A and everyone follows that. And I've never heard that. I saw people Googling that. I'm gonna Google that. We're gonna have a meeting about that. Oboe. And we're gonna have the oboes section over here, and people that believe that the cello or the violin or the trombone, you've split the church. Thank you. Philippians chapter 2, again, the Apostle Paul. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if you have any comfort from his love, any fellowship with the Spirit, any tenderness, compassion, make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing, here we go, here's the heart of the issue. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. I think that's the challenge right there. We could just stop right there. Consider others better than me? Me? Do you realize what a gift I am to this church and to this world? Me? Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. But I like my own interests. They're mine. I don't want to look after your interest. I don't care about your interest. I only care about mine, because it's all about me. Am I the only one that feels that way sometimes? Yes, Jim. 1 Peter chapter 3, here's Peter, he kicks in. Finally, all of you live in harmony with one another. Be sympathetic, love as brothers, be compassionate, humble. Don't repay evil with evil. Well, you don't know what they did to me. Or insult with insult. Oh, that's so hard. In this Facebook world of, boom, I'm gonna get even. But with blessing. Someone offends you, say something nice about them. Do something good. And watch the unity level of the church go through the roof. Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. You want to be blessed by God? Watch your tongue. Titus, chapter 3, Message translation. Warn a quarrelsome person once or twice, but then be done with him. It's obvious such a person is out of line, rebellious against God. By persisting in divisiveness, he cuts himself off. Paul says there are some people in the church that if they won't come into line along this whole thing of loving and submitting and helping and being kind, talk to them, and then sayonara. The unity of the church is more important than having someone like you around here. When's the last time you saw a church do that? to someone that caused trouble all the time. My ministers group, again, we meet on Wednesday morning. There are about 20 or 30 of us from across North America. And I'd say probably a good 40% of the conversation is that one person in the church that is just keeping one of those guys going nuts, trying to deal with that one critic. And everyone's afraid to deal with them because they've been in the church forever and their parents did this or they give that much and all this. And the whole church revolves around keeping that person happy. Last one, Hebrews 13:17. We don't know who wrote Hebrews. Maybe it was Paul. We're not sure. But he says, obey your leaders and submit to their authority. They keep watch over you as men who must give an account. Obey them. Obey? I don't like that word. I don't obey anybody. I'm my own boss. In church, we're all volunteers. What do you mean, obey them? So their work will be a joy. Not a burden, for that would be of no advantage to you. That early church wasn't a whole lot different from the church today. It had lots of cultural and political diversity. You had Jews, you had Gentiles. Never the twain shall meet. Hundreds of years of animosity. The Jews looked down their nose at the Gentiles. The Gentiles thought the Jews were just a bunch of stuck-up religious hypocrites. And yet the early church, they sat together in the same seats, in the same room, at the same table, putting their differences aside. The early church had Romans and the conquered peoples. The Romans were the hated invading army. And here you have Roman soldiers, Roman commanders at the communion table with the very people that they have enslaved and subjugated. You don't think that was difficult? You don't think some people had some hard decisions to make about bitterness and resentment? You had slaves and masters. Now, the New Testament concept of loving people would eventually be the impetus for the Western world doing away with slavery, starting with William Wilberforce over in England and then spreading across to the United States. It was Christian principles that eventually did away with that, but in the New Testament times, this was a fact of life, and the command was, slaves, you obey your masters. And so in the early church, you had slaves and masters. How about that? Sitting at the same communion table, in the same Bible study, in the same prayer group. You had those who were highly moral. They came from impeccable moral lives. And then you had those who had multiple liaisons and sexual histories and drug addictions. And here they are in the same body of believers, united. Rich, poor. This was counterintuitive in the first century. This is not the way it should be. This is a shocker. These are people coming together who have no business coming together because their nature, their history, their background, their story, they should hate each other. They should want nothing to do with each other. And yet that was the early church. People who by the world standards should despise each other, they got along because they had the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And it was a beautiful thing. And the world looked at that and said, wow, this might be worth checking out. Because that's not supposed to happen. Today we've got the same thing. We've got the anti-vax. Again, going back to my preachers group on Wednesdays, I'd say another 30% of the time is spent on dealing with the vaccination issue. And if you get vaccinated, then you don't have faith and you're stupid because the political system is out to imprison all of us and we're just dupes. And CNN is their main dupe machine. And then you've got the other side that says, you know, I'm going to get vaxxed. It's a real issue. And you've got believers in churches that are doing this, and churches are splitting, and preachers are quitting, and elders are quitting in churches all across America, actually all across the world, because of this division. Can't we all just say, you have your opinion, I have my opinion, but because of Jesus Christ, I'm going to love you? It's not happening in a lot of churches. It's happened here. I'm proud of this congregation. We've, from the beginning, the elders just said, if you're not comfortable coming here, don't come. We won't judge you for that. We won't say bad things about you for that. But please don't judge us or say bad things about us if we feel comfortable not masking up. And it's been, I think, probably 97% effective. You've got the housed and the unhoused sitting in the same church service today. You've got those who have never been addicted, and you've got those who are recovering addicts. We don't sit there and say, boy, what a screw up you are. I ever hear that, boy, it won't be pretty. We're all screw ups. We all are a mess somewhere. We've all made choices. Some of them we got caught and paid a high price, and some of them we haven't gotten caught and we think we got away with it. Why don't we just come real and say, we're all a mess, and I need the grace of God. And you've heard it said that the ground is level at the foot of the cross. There's no hierarchy of sinners there. We come together because I need Jesus Christ. I need salvation. And we may have sinned differently. Life may have thrown different circumstances my way that went into making me who and what I am. But the Spirit of God and the blood of Jesus Christ, I have a completely new future. And I'm trying to walk towards that, and I want to walk towards that with you, even though we have different battles. That's a beautiful thing. It really is. It's powerful, too, to a world that is watching us. And yet, regardless of our differences, God expects that because of Christ, those differences become irrelevant. Our standing in Christ become prominent, the dominant thing. Above all else, I'm a follower of Jesus. We are followers of Jesus. A healthy church is a diverse church. So here's a question just to throw out there. Does what I say and do help others know that God loves them? Does what I say and do on a regular basis, my interaction with church people especially, but even those outside of church, does it help people know that God loves them? And if not, well, change it. I don't even care why not. Change it. Which brings us to the core verse today. We're in core 52. We're back in that, the core 52 verses. You understand these. You have a good understanding of the Bible. Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. We've just talked about all that stuff. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there's one body and one Spirit, just as you've been called into one glorious hope for the future, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all, who's over all, in all, and living through all. However, he's given each one of us a special gift through the generosity of Christ. And we're actually going to take a look at that last phrase there in a moment. One preacher talking about this paraphrased it this way. He said, God says, I've given you unity, now do your best to keep it. The unity's there. Our job is not to lose it. God is one, his body, the church must be one. And we could take a whole nother sermon and just look at the text there. Notice the Trinitarian language. Spirit, Lord, which is the Son, Father. The whole essential unity of God, the Trinity we call it. We're baptized into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. The whole Trinitarian nature of our God extends to his body, the church. Verse 7 talks about a special gift. It's circled up there. Your translation might say grace, it might say gifts, it might say favor, special abilities. The Greek word is charis, C-H-A-R-I-S. That's where the word charismatic comes from. He has given each one of us a special gift, a charis, through the generosity of Christ. I listened to one preacher preaching this passage, and he called it chariz instead of charis. Chariz. He says, we're all charizers. It's where the idea of charismatic comes from. Charismatic gifts. They're mentioned in Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12. We're not going to do a whole study of that, but they've identified at least 16 spiritual gifts in the New Testament. Churches divide over whether they exist today or not. Some churches believe some of them do. Some believe all of them do. I have my own opinions. I think some are definitely here. I think others are questionable. I'm open to discussing it. I'm not going to cut you off as a brother in Jesus or a sister in Jesus because of it. But what I want to focus on is Paul's point here is the gifts are not for you. They're for yous. The gifts are not for you. They're for yous. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we call it the what chapter? The love chapter. Why did he write 1 Corinthians 13? Because he knew that in 2,000 years they would need some really cool scriptures to read at weddings? He wrote 1 Corinthians 13 because in 1 Corinthians 12 they had forgotten what the purpose of these spiritual gifts were for, and it was all about them. And so he says, look, I don't care what gift you got. If you don't got love, you got nothing. Spiritual gifts are not for you, they are for use. One preacher said a charismatic is someone who has received a gift from Jesus and wants to pass it on. I like that. I like that we are all charismatics. I haven't thought of myself that way theologically before, because I don't jump up and down, I don't speak in tongues, I don't perform miracles, I don't handle snakes, I don't do the things that are often thought of in that context. But in this context, I'm a charismatic. I have a gift. Now, there's discussion, was that gift given to you when you became a follower of Jesus? When you were baptized, you received the gift of the Holy Spirit, Acts chapter 2 says. When exactly do we get the gifts? Are we given them at birth and then it's activated, sanctified when we become a follower of Jesus? We don't know, and it's not all laid out that clearly as we would like. But I think the New Testament's clear is that we all have chariz. Say it with me. Chariz. Maybe that's a good name for the coffee bar. Chariz. Like, what is that? We're all charismatics. We all have a gift. And unity in the church is cultivated when we spend our energy and our time giving others that gift. What are you giving? To the church and even to those outside the church. Because if you don't just give in one place, it becomes a lifestyle. I think of one of our number here that donates haircuts to the homeless. He's got a gift of cutting hair. I have that gift, but I only cut my own. I ask people if they'd like me to cut their hair, and they always say no, and it hurts my feelings. Lots of you have the gift of generosity. I have been blessed beyond measure by those with the gift of generosity. Years ago, I've told you this story. We had a hospital bill, and we couldn't afford it. We were dirt poor in Ohio. And we get the monthly statement, and I noticed it was going down by 30 or 40 bucks a month, and I had no idea what was happening. Come to find out, Flo Manning, who worked in the billing department at the hospital, a member of our church. I baptized Flo. She was a Methodist. Had a great Bible study about why she should be immersed versus sprinkled as a baby. And it was one of the most meaningful studies I've had. And she had such a tender heart, and she knew that we didn't have insurance and we were dirt poor, and she, out of every paycheck, she paid off a couple $100 hospital bill. That's a gift. She used her gift. I remember Russ and Betty Bergen. I was a youth minister back in, oh my goodness, 40 years ago. It seemed like such a long time. Again, dirt poor, living in Bible college, making 50 bucks a week, driving down to Baltimore. It's not Baltimore. Balmer, forget the T. We're going down to Balmer. And I felt bad because I always wanted Russ to come up and give me a handshake, because probably 50% of the time there'd be a $50 bill stuck in there. Hey Jim, how you doing this morning? And I got to tell you, when it wasn't there, I was a little bit disappointed. Like, oh, okay, I guess, Russ. I'd run around the church. Have you seen Russ today? Let's go find Russ. Russ, I'd run across the parking lot. Russ, how you doing, buddy? Oh. They've been dead for decades, and it still is a memory, a sweet, sweet memory of a church, of a Christian, of a church member who used his gift. He was interesting. He worked in the defense industry as an engineer and would never tell me what he did. A lot of that around the D.C. area. I would ask him, so how'd work go this week? Oh, work was good. What'd you do? What are you working on? Oh, work was good. Alex and Helen, they abandoned us. How is that for unity when you just walk away from a church? Oops, they watch this. I love them so much. They were so good to us. They've been, their generosity is famous. Let me tell you about one that's really cool. I told you about that church split. On my birthday, everyone got up, walked out. Ugly, ugly moment. Luana French was part of that, elder's wife. Haven't seen him in years. Good people, I love them. We just differed. I still don't know what happened in that split. That's God's truth. Fast forward a couple decades. A couple of weeks ago, Kim gets an email from a gal at our church in Maryland. I had baptized her, Catholic background. Husband, Irish Catholic. Big family. He's got a sister that's a nun. She got 4 or 5 kids. One of the girls I just adore. She was always had a smile. Always. No matter what was going on. Grin from ear to ear. She's married now. Pregnant in March. Due in March with her first child. It's going to be a girl. Girl's name's going to be Micah. And Micah probably won't live maybe a few minutes, maybe a few hours, probably not much more than that. She's got several heart issues, lung issues. The doctors have said this is 100% fatal. Well, we've been away from Maryland for 8 years now. And Kim gets a message. Do you know anyone that makes burial gowns? Anyone familiar with a burial gown? I'm not. That's not from my tradition. Apparently there's special gowns that you can make for infants, and they die, and they're buried in this burial gown. Maybe it's a Catholic thing. I don't know. But she couldn't find anyone locally to make this. And I say to Kim, who do we know in the Maryland area that's a seamstress, that this might... Luana French. We parted under not the best of circumstances, but I'll tell you what, that didn't mean squat to me. So I called her husband, Scott. I said, look, here's the deal. We've got a hurting sister in Christ, and her daughter's this is what they're gonna go through. Do you think Luana would like to make her? He said she would be honored. And so she was gonna get contacted, and I'm still waiting for March to find out how this went. But isn't that a beautiful thing? Not even in the same church. But here's a need. And here's a believer in Jesus who has that gift. Now you might say, well, gee, how much is sowing a spiritual gift? You see right here how much that is a spiritual gift. Mark Moore, who wrote the book Core 52, says, you want to know how to find your spiritual gifts? Because some of you are wondering. He says, you walk into a room, you look around, you identify what needs to be done that you would enjoy doing with excellence, and there it is. The Willow Creek Church for years had a spiritual gifts inventory, and I've taught through this. I've actually led people through this, and it's valuable. And you can take like self-assessment inventories, they're kind of like personality tests, and help you kind of get an idea for what area of ministry you might be suited for. Interestingly, Willow Creek went away from that now, and you know what they tell people now how to find their spiritual gift? Go serve. It's not that complicated. What satisfies you? What do you do for other people that you do well and that does something deep inside and fulfills you? Go do it, and do it in Jesus' name. I kind of like that. It's not rocket science. So let's go to D-Day. June of 1944. Paratroopers have landed behind enemy lines to cut off the road so the Germans couldn't escape from the pillboxes that lined the beaches at Normandy. Two of them were medics, Robert Wright and Ken Moore. They landed behind Utah Beach and they set up an aid station in a 700-year-old church. And this was a fluid battlefield. It changed hands several times until about the third day when the Americans finally secured Angloville O'Plaine, and it became the Americans. So for 2 or 3 days, the battle is raging around them, and these two guys are going out onto the battlefield, and they're picking up the wounded from both sides. Germans, Americans. And to get inside the church and get medical help, they have to leave their weapons outside. No weapons inside. And they agreed to that. And they laid them on the pews, just like this. And they treated them, regardless of their uniform. And then they would get them situated, and then they'd go out. And when they went out, both sides recognized what was happening, and they would stop shooting long enough to let these two guys run around and drag the wounded off the battlefield and bring them back into the church. And at one point, some Germans burst into there with their machine guns, and they were going to kill them. And they looked around, and they saw that these American medics were treating both sides, giving them excellent care to the best of their ability. And one officer said, I'm going to send my personal physician in to help you guys. And they put red crosses on the doors of the church to identify it as a place that's not to be shot at. And these two medics treated over 80 soldiers from both sides. A mortar actually came through the ceiling, broke a tile on the church floor, miraculously did not explode. The blood soaked through the pews to this very day. You can see this next slide shows you a picture of what the pews look like. They varnished over it. They wanted the blood to stay there. The stained glass windows that they repaired after the battle pay honor to these American medics for what they did. And both those guys were awarded a Silver Star. And Robert Wright's ashes were buried in a cemetery years later, and you can find his tombstone there. Now, not his whole body, because they had to sneak just some of the ashes in. Regulations would not allow him to get there. Is that not a great picture of what Paul prayed for the church in Ephesians chapter 4? We can't stop the bullets flying around outside. But boy, we sure can control what happens inside. And here's a news flash. If more churches were consumed and busy with taking care of people, guess what? There'd be no time, there'd be no energy to fight over stupid things that end up telling the world we're no different than you are. That's worthy of an amen. Now, here's the caveat I mentioned earlier. I'm not saying there aren't some things worth fighting over in church. Key doctrines are essential. Jesus warned about false teachers coming in among the believers. The Apostle Paul warned about false teachers. Truth is a huge thing to pay attention to. In Acts chapter 15, the early church almost split over whether we're saved by following the law of Moses or the gospel of Jesus Christ. Do you have to be circumcised? Do you have to follow the law of Moses to be right with God, or is it by grace? They almost split, and they had a big meeting, and the unanimous conclusion was it's by grace. You don't have to follow the law. If that had not happened, the church would have died right there. We would have had no message. There are some cardinal doctrines that are a hill to die on. The deity of Jesus. He was God in the flesh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You don't believe that? Kind of hard to be a church. The virgin birth makes no sense. It's whacked. It's bizarre. That's clearly what the Scripture teaches. Jesus was fully God, fully human. I can't explain it. That's a faith thing. The resurrection, he came out of that grave. He was alive, which proves everything that he taught. Why do I believe the Bible? Not because it all makes sense, not because I can answer everything, because Jesus was dead and now he's alive, and what he said then is true. Inspiration of the Bible. What we believe about baptism, that's pretty important to me. The biblical view of sexuality, which is the hot button in today's culture. But let's be honest, most of the things that divide local congregations are petty. They're power plays, they're opinions, they're about ego, they're about status, they're about traditions. Sadly, love goes out the window and the bullets fly inside the church and the mortars explode and lots of innocent people get wounded. Let me give you a challenge. Let's be that oddball church that gives gifts to each other. Let's be that oddball church that gives gifts to each other and to outsiders. Let's be known for reflecting the unity of the nature of God, Spirit, Son, and Father. I wanted to, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. I wanted to get just little gift boxes for everybody, little wrap them up, little bows on top, and I wanted to give everybody a little gift box just to take home and put somewhere that you would see it every day. And just remember, when you're tempted to fire a rifle in here at a fellow believer, God calls you to give a gift, because reflecting the unity of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit trumps whatever it is you're upset about. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace, for there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all. May it be so, right here.